Hi and welcome to another Blender Jam VFX tutorial. Today we're taking a digital clip and we're going to turn it into a grungy, old worn out VHS style look. This is a nice effect for if you wanted to get a dirty pirate, horrible old fashioned video look on your film, or if you just wanted, like I did, a found footage movie type thing. And as you can see from the clip that's showing, we used it to pretty good effect. It looks pretty good. It's nice, old looking, grungy, distorted, and it's just all a bit of a mess, but that's the look we were going for and it worked out pretty well. So let's get into Blender and the compositing window and we'll start taking a look at what we need to do to achieve this effect. So we'll start by opening up the compositing window, and we don't really need the 3D window or the UV image editor, so I will close those down quickly. So all we're left with is the little timeline window and the properties panel, which we will be using later for our textures and our rendering settings. So let's look at what we're trying to create this time, and I have a screenshot here, and this is just simply a single frame of a VHS movie that I took with a VHS camera. That sadly broke before I could use it, which inspired me to try and recreate the look using Blender's compositor. So as you can see, we have no straight edges really, because everything straight is distorted and broken up by the noise in the scene. The reds, greens and blue colours are bleeding into each other, creating red, green and blue patches, and there's a lot of noise and scan lines everywhere, and it's just, well, just really horrible. And as you can see, this is a good look for the old-fashioned found footage kind of movies which I used. Or it could be good for doing a pirate video clip if that's what you need, and just general grungy, dirty, old, broken down films. So we'll take a look at that. We'll get back into the compositor and make a start on getting what we need. Right, so with the compositor in, let's click use nodes and we'll select backdrop so we can see what's happening. And in our settings we need to switch to the size of the actual clip that we're going to be using. For VHS the best look is 640 by 480. I typed in the wrong number there, but never mind. Remember, 620 by 480. And we'll change the frame rate to 30 frames a second, and we will now simply delete the render layers node and add in our movie clip. So simply press add and choose input and movie clip from the file menu, and then we'll choose open, select the video footage, and we have a clip that you can use. This clip, if you don't have one ready available, just download it from our website, and you can see that it's just a little park scene with a couple of seagulls in. Nothing really special, but we have recorded it in PAL type 640 by 480p to give us that look of that aspect ratio of a VHS clip, which you would find on normal VHS videos. Let's take a look at our reference again, and as we can see, we want to first start with getting all this noise in around everything, and to do that we're going to, let's head back to Blender, we're going to switch to our textures panel first, and we're going to change the default texture from text to noise. So I'll just type that in, rename it noise texture, and then I'll change the type from none to noise, and this gives us a randomly generated noise texture. So on each frame this little texture here will change to a random pattern. As you can see, when I scrub through the timeline it just changes randomly like so. Okay, that's enough of that. So let's start by building our noise, and we're going to organise our node group with frames, and this first frame is going to be our noise texture and distortions. So I'm going to duplicate this frame a couple of times and just drop the frames inside each other, and then I want to rename the frames to, I'm going to call it RGB noise, and then I'm going to start by bringing in that texture node, that texture that I just created by creating a texture node, and just drop it into the frame within the frame. Choose the, just move it a bit closer, choose the texture from the textures panel, and that brings our noise into the view. And if I control shift click rather, you can see the noise pattern just filled in the whole frame. But as you can tell, that's not good enough, because our reference, we have these the noise is actually elongated due to scan lines and things, so we need to recreate that. So next I'll add in a distort scale, drop that into the frame, drop it in, there we go. So now we have a scale of which we are going to change the X value. We're just going to drag that up a few spaces until we get some nice elongated noise, get it stretched out, and I think 15 looks about right for this one, so that'll do. Yep, looks fine. So the next part is to colorize our noise, and we're going to simply do that by adding in an RGB node, and we'll combine that with a color mix node. Now we plug the RGB into the bottom socket, and we'll plug the scale node into the top socket. Make the colour of the RGB a nice red, and we'll change the mix factor to multiply. So when we control shift click our multiply node, you can see we now have a nice red noise pattern, which is ideal. Okay, so let's organise our frame a little bit. First we will just close down this multiply node because we don't need to do anything with it, and we'll check this colour tick box, and we're going to make this red the same as our noise, just a nice red shade there. And we will also rename the thing to rename it red noise, and press enter, and that should be fine for that. Now we want to select everything in this frame, so select the frame and its contents, and then press shift D to duplicate it and drag it down a bit. Select the frame, and we're going to change the colour from red to green, and select the new RGB node, and we'll also change the colour of that to green, so we now have a nice red and green noise. If I just show there, see, it's green. Now I just select the frame once again, and we will rename it to green noise. And so now we simply repeat that process of copying the nodes in the frame and duplicating them, and this time we make them blue, so we now have a red, green and blue set of nodes. And we'll just finish by tidying up by closing down these nodes and making everything a little bit smaller so we've got room to manoeuvre later on. So now we need to connect these all together, and to do that we just simply add in a colour mix, and drop that in there and change it to an add node, so we're adding the values together, and we simply connect the new add node to the multiply outputs of the red and green and put them together, and you see we get this nice mix of red and green noise together. If we press now shift D and duplicate that add node, and we connect the output from the blue multiply to the output of the combined red and green, and I Control Shift click. You see we now have this red, green and blue noise looking VHS noise, which is excellent for what we want. Okay, so now that's done, let's take a look at how it looks on top of our movie footage. So if I just move these out of the way and add a mix node, Shift A, Color Mix, and I'll just drop that onto the final output from the noise frame and connect up the movie clip, and you can see a great deal. So if I just zoom in by pressing Alt V, we can get a closer look, and if I put the sockets in the right position, I want the noise in the bottom socket and the film footage in the top socket. Then we need to change the mix node blending mode from mix to overlay, and you can also use soft light. That sometimes works better, but in this case we'll start with overlay to see what happens. And as you can see, it's a bit too strong, so we're going to reduce the factor down to about 0.6 or 0.7 and just reduce the influence of that quite a bit. And there we go, that looks quite nice. You can see the noise all over everything, and I've just darkened it up a bit to give it that older, slightly more worn out feel. So we have our noise, but we have it's not distorting the image like we wanted. If we look at our reference quickly, you can see the noise is causing distortions around the edges of everything, breaking everything up. But before we can do the distorted noise, we need to create the halos and the red, green and blue fringing that we will find on normal videos, and that's simple enough. We can simply start by adding in a new frame, and this one we're going to call color offset. I'll just type that into the label, color offset. Actually, I'll rename that as RGB offset instead, because that makes more sense. So now to get this halo effect, we're going to simply add in a separate RGB node, and we're going to add in also a converter combine RGB node. If I can get it in the frame, there we go. Now I want to connect the output from the movie file into the separate RGB, and if I Control and Shift click onto that, Control Shift click, you can see the different red, green and blue channels. If I just Control Shift click through the different sockets, and now if I Control Shift click onto the output node, you can see we actually see nothing because we need to combine them back together again. But before we combine them, we're going to add in the offset. So I need to add a distort. It's a distort, yep, distort translate node, and if I plug the red channel in and connect it, you can see we have our red channel, and if I put our blue and green together, you can see that brings it all back to normal. Now if I scroll in a bit and start moving the X along the X value of the red, you can see in the background the red channel is separating itself from the rest of them, and you can see the trees. And now if I add in a slight blur, get it in the frame and just give it 2 pixels of blur, you can see that looks substantially more distorted, and we have our offset, at least on the red channel anyway. Give it a little bit of Y value to push it up, so we've got some fringing on the horizons there, on the vertical edges as well as the horizontal, and that's looking quite nice and grungy. So now we can simply duplicate these two nodes and drop them down a bit, and we'll duplicate them again, so we've got a set for each of the channels. I'll plug in the green and then I'll plug in the blue. So as you can see, the three channels are all overlaid on top of each other now because they all have the exact same settings. So I'm going to reset the blue values to 0 because I don't really want any of the blue to be moved. And then I'm going to change the green to a different value, slightly less than the red channel, and I move it into the negative direction as well, so it's slightly below the horizon, and it just gives it that nice fringing offset effect, and you can see that in the edges of the screen. So while that looks pretty much fine, we can do something a little bit different by taking the blue channel, and instead of connecting it through the translate node, we can actually flood the entire channel by disconnecting it and just using the value of the blue, and by cranking that up slightly, you can see we can get a really old faded look on our scene, which is pretty cool. Sometimes it's a bit extreme, sometimes it's not quite what you want, and it's a bit yellow in this, and we can put the value up higher and get a slightly better look. It depends entirely on what you're going for. Sometimes it's better with the actual value, sometimes it's better without. It just, like I say, depends on the look you're going for. And I think that we shall leave it out for the moment. We might change our mind later, but for now this looks nice. This looks good. Now I'm just going to tidy everything up, and then we can move on to the next phase. Okay, so let's take a look at how this all looks connected together so far. Let's just connect this into the mix node again, our overlay node. Control Shift click, and there we have our final result, and it's not looking too good. It's a bit bright, so we'll adjust some of the settings. I'm going to pull down the mix factor on the overlay, and I think I'm actually going to change it to a different blend mode. See if I can find one that I actually like, and just adjust the settings until we get somewhere that looks right. I'll try the soft light setting, which is the one I used in the actual video that I made, but it's a bit harsh, but I think it'll go. I think that looks fine. Yeah, that looks okay. I can work with that. Now all we have to do is to create the distortions, and I'll just zoom in with Alt V a little bit, and to get the distortions we're going to need to take the noise and use it as a displacement map. So first thing we'll do is we'll go back to our RGB noise settings and select the two add nodes and press Shift D and duplicate them and just drop them down. Now we're just going to take the value from the actual scale node and plug those into those add nodes. We're just going to add the scale values together so that each of the noise patterns match our distortions. So we'll just connect those and connect those. Now if I now we press Shift A rather, and go to Distort and choose the Displace node, and this is a fun little node that I use quite a lot. So we need the value from this final add node, and if we just take a quick look at that with Control Shift click, put it through our viewer, you can see it's just a black and white noise, and we're going to use this noise as a displacement map, and this will control the value from each of these groups into the displace node, and that will give us our distortions that we need. So we simply connect that into the vector output of the displace node, and now if we take the final output from our offset and put that into the image of the displace node, you can see nothing actually happens straight away. Just get that set up. Right, you can see now that we've got the noise and everything on, but there's no actual distortions. So now we start to crank up the X and Y, and the more we put them up, you can start to see immediately all our straight edges are getting broken and distorted, which is exactly the effect we need. And look at that, if we adjust the Y as well a little bit and the X, and it just gives it that finishing little bit of touch. And as we scrub through the timeline, you can see the noise is changing alongside the various frames, which is absolutely fantastic and brilliant, and that is pretty much job done. So we could finish up there and call that done, or we can add a little bit extra to our scene and add in, well, it's like a band of noise that tends to scroll down the screen in VHS type displays. I don't know what causes it, but it's pretty common, so we're going to try that. So let's start off by adding a new frame, and we're going to simply reuse the texture nodes that we made before. So if we go to input texture and drop that into our frame, go on, get in there we go, and duplicate it. Of course we're going to have two bars, so duplicate it, and we'll just choose the texture, and now we want to add in a set of nodes. So go to add, what do we need? Add a scale node, and just connect those two together. And now we take a look at our noise, and you can see that it's just the same noise, and the first thing we're going to do is take the X value and make that really small, so 0.02, press enter, and now you can see it's compressed it down into a thin bar. And we're going to take the X value and we're going to bring that right up, so about 2.7, 20.7 is good. Now we shift D to duplicate that node and connect the two of them like so. Okay, now you can see nothing much changed. Of course the values are identical, so I'm going to just bring that to the viewer so we can see what's going on, and we need to change some of the values. I'm going to change the X value to quite a bit lower, to maybe about 11. I think 11 looks good. Yep. And I'm going to change the Y value to 0.1 rather. I can't type. 0.01 is too small. Let's change that back. If I just press on it and type it in, we might have a better effect. So 0.01. There we go. That's what we want, a nice thin bar for our effect. And that's lovely. Now we need to have our bars to scroll down the screen, so first thing we're going to do is add in a pair of translate nodes. So go to add, Distort, Translate, and then Shift D to duplicate that node. And once they're all tucked in nicely, which they will be presently, just drop those in, make them nice. We need to adjust the values, so if I adjust the, oops, no, not the X, because that only stretches it along the X value, so we don't really need to play with that, that's a non-entity. We need the Y value, so if we drag that up, and if we take it up to about 210, yeah, almost there, 27, 28, 29, 210, that's about right. We're off the screen, which is where we need to be. Just bring it down a bit closer, there we go. Now if I hit the I button to insert a keyframe, and then I move along in my timeline to maybe 60, 90 frames, pretty good. So now we need to just drag down the value so that the scroll bar is at the bottom of the screen, and we just keep dragging that down until it disappears. Drag, 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 a bit more. That's about right. Just fine tuning. And then if we hit I again and insert a second keyframe, we now have an animation where our scroll bar is going to come right down the frame. But we need a bit more than that, so we're going to go to the this is the graph editor, and we're going to make sure we have our node selected, otherwise nothing will show up in the graph. Go back to our graph editor, and there we go, we have our animation as a graph, and we want to change this from a constant thing to a linear Bezier, so it's a nice smooth animation. And then we add a modifier, choose cycles, and there we now have a repetitive cycling animation, so that will cover the entire length of our clip. Let's go back to our node editor, and now we need to do the same to the other translate node. Just drag the Y value up until it's off the screen, making sure you're on the first frame, and then just we'll connect it to the viewer node, and we will just type in the values and adjust them to make the thing go off the screen. It's slightly higher because it's a thicker bar, so 214 is plenty. But we'll go a bit higher and then insert our keyframe just to give it a bit more room to maneuver. That'll differentiate the speed of the thing. And also we're going to go to a much higher frame, about frame 120, and then we'll reduce the size of the value in the Y into the negative, so it's down at the bottom of the screen. Adjust it so it disappears, and then insert another keyframe, and that's that bit done. We jump back into our graph editor, press T to bring up our extrapolation panel, and choose linear, and then we go to our modifiers. I'm not seeing my modifiers, so I'm going to go to my channel menu and open up the extrapolation mode and set it to cyclic. Make sure I have the nodes selected, and try that again. Extrapolation mode, make cyclic, there we go. And now we have our two animations for our scroll bars working all very nicely. So if we head back to our node editor, and we need to connect these nodes together, so all we need to do now is to add a displace node again. So distort, displace, and we'll drop that there. We'll take the output from there into the displace vector and the image from the main tree into the image node, and let's take a look at that. Actually, we need to connect our noise together, so let's add in a alpha over node, and we need this to combine the two, otherwise we'll just get a black image. It won't work with a mix node. I'll just drop that in there, and we just combine these two together nice and simply, one in the top, one in the bottom, doesn't matter which way, as they're all going to be on top of each other. Now, as you can see, we just have a black screen, which we will fix presently. First thing though, I need to put in a subtract node, so I'm going to put in a colour mix just drop that here, and I will make a bit of room. I need to subtract the top bar from the bottom one, so we'll put those two together, and that's that done nicely. And the reason for this is because the two will interact with each other, and if they're just on a mixed node, you get weird black bars and things. You can't see it at the moment because we need to go in and finalize our connections. So I just need to put in another alpha over node, so Shift A, alpha over, and we just need to connect the displace node into the alpha over node. Put one in, Shift A, alpha over, drop that there, and take the output from the displace node and plug that into the top of the alpha over, and we'll take the bottom alpha over and plug that into the bottom of the new alpha over. That's not quite right. We need to switch the values from the texture nodes from value to colour, because it's the colour information that we're actually putting on, so we just swap those values on, and there we go, there's our image back. And now we just need to adjust things so we can see our bars. Okay, so it seems I've made another little mistake on this, and I need to start again with the keyframes because these values are for some reason too high now. So I'll just right click and delete keyframes, and on the bottom one right click, delete keyframes, clear keyframes, and go back to the first frame, and we'll try and get them back in properly this time. Okay, so for some reason it wants us to go in really tiny increments instead of the values that we were using, so I'm going to adjust the Y value to 0.6, and then we will insert the keyframe there, and we will just do exactly what we did before. I'll skip along my timeline about 90 frames, change the Y value back down to a negative number, about negative 0.6 again, try that, negative 6, and insert the keyframe, and then we just go through, scrub through just to check it's working, and then we can go to the graph editor, make everything cyclic, and then repeat the same process on the other translate node. There, now if we connect everything together again, we can see that our bars are now working. they're showing up in the screen. And right, so now once we've got everything plugged in properly, we'll give it a little quick test render, and then we can go out and see how fantastic our little video looks. So I'll set up the render settings now, and we can see what happens. And that's looking pretty fine. It's a little bit harsh, but we can always tone down the settings a bit just to pull back the effect slightly. But in general, that's pretty good. That's what we were looking for. Now all we need to do is to turn this bundle of nodes into a node group so that we can use it on our other things. So I'll just move these inputs and outputs out of the way. Then I will press B and box select the entire node group and press Alt G, and that gives us everything selected. Oops. Press B, Alt G, and it should just pop into a nice group. Sorry, Control G. No wonder it wasn't working. And everything is now set up, ready to be dealt with. All we need to do is change the name and change the outputs. On the final version, I have connected all the settings into inputs, and I just have these outputs, but I'm not going to do that now because it's taking long and we're like over half an hour into the video already. And I just want to show you one last thing, which is how to use the nodes on a different group, on a different video. So if we close this down for now, just rename that output, press enter so we know where that's supposed to go. Anyway, let's go up, and there's our little group. Now if I so now I'm going to save this as VHS comp 1 just as something to name it, and press save. Now I've got that saved on my desktop, so it's all secure. I can shut Blender down now and open up a new file. And I'm just going to open up a video file that I've set up previously, and this is just a scene from the film where the 3D creature walked across the screen. And as you can see, there's just a simple model with a shadow catcher plane and some odd lighting. The materials aren't quite set up properly, but that doesn't really matter for this. It's just a test. I'm going to open up just any old movie file. This one will do. School corridor, that's fine. And make a few adjustments to get the thing in the scene, and then we'll look at putting our node in. Okay, so now that we've got a model in the scene, actually I need to adjust the film size, so I'm going to add in a scale node. So I'll just Shift A, add scale, and I'll drop it in right before the movie clip. Change the setting to render size, and the ratio thing set to crop, like so. Change the render size, and now you can see that we have the correct aspect ratio on our movie clip, and our bug creature thing is nicely on the floor. So that's all done, and we can give it a look. Let's just get our node group in, and we need to go to File, and we want to append it into our scene. So we go to Append, go to the VHS node group that we made, and we choose the node trees, and we just select the node tree. Click Append from Library, and we are good to go. Now all that remains to do is to choose it from the groups, node group, and drop it right on the end of our node group just before the final output. I've dropped it on between the viewer as well, and that's all good. Now I open up the node group and I can play around, change some of the settings, make it not quite as intense on this one because it looks a bit too extreme with this video. So I'll find the settings that I need. I just want to adjust the displacement and a little bit, and do something with the offset. Just change those a little bit. We'll just simply pull some values down, and we'll connect up the blue. I think we'll just poke that in, see what happens if we let's put it in the green socket. Why not? Just random. Looks a bit terrible, but you wouldn't actually do that normally. That was just a bit of a mess around. Anyway, that's all there is to do with that. That's fine. And now all you really need to do is to save out the node group into your library of node groups. I'm sure you have one. And that is it. That's the end of that. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you again soon. Don't forget to subscribe, and also make use of this technique and share your results on the comments below. Post a link, let us all see what you've done, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching. Good night.